having charts be effectively the product or a large part of the product made you think all day about charts. I had no idea, man. No idea. It was just like this cool. The number one thing that every founder should know about equity is that
Welcome to the very first episode of Peter Shin's Insight Marathon, highly profitable, minimally operable, a dedicated podcast to startup founders, entrepreneurs, business leaders who want access to actionable insights to build highly effective, profitable ventures without complexity. I'm your host, Peter Shin, a venture capitalist, startup mentor, and an ex-co-founder of a YC-backed company. Over the years, I've worked with hundreds of founders through my role at 500, helping them refine their ideas, raise funding, and navigate the challenges of scaling business effectively. Today, I am thrilled to kick off the series with none other than Peter Walker. Peter is the head of insights at Carta, where he leverages data to demystify the venture-backed startup ecosystem, a role that places him at the cutting edge of startup data, trends, and venture capital analysis. He also is a prolific content creator with over 100K LinkedIn followers, where he shares daily startup insights that illuminate the complexities of building a venture-backed company. Peter, thank you so much for being here to help us kick off the series.
Hey, fellow Peter. Absolutely happy to be here, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming to the series. Peter, I want to dive straight into your story. Can you take us back to where it all started? What sparked your interest in startups and an incredible career journey leading up to your current role at Carta?
Sure. I mean, honestly, I think it was, we could go back even further than college, but if we wanted to stick there, I ended up starting a company while I was in college with a few friends. If I'm being completely honest, most of the reason why we started it was to avoid having real summer jobs. And we were trying to, pretend at being startup founders. But then we really got into it and had built this business around music festivals and merchandising. And we ended up, going to dozens and dozens of music festivals that summer. And, that sounds super exciting and fun, but we were the ones selling merch, packing up, loading up the U-Hauls, and then sleeping in Walmart parking lots and doing it again the next day. So it was pretty hard work most of the time as well. But it definitely gave me the startup bug. And then immediately out of school, I joined a small startup back east called Public Relay that did media intelligence. And that's where, one of the advantages of working at a small startup is that if you just get over that bar of competency, there's 1,000 problems to solve. And most of the time, the founders and the other folks at the company are focused on solving the one or two most important challenges, which means that challenges 3 through 50 are available to be solved by someone else. And it doesn't really matter what your job title is. It doesn't really matter what you were hired to do originally. If you can be a heat-seeking missile for problems and go and solve all these things that maybe are not the first thing for the company, but they're problems 3 through 10, you just learn so much. So I did operations teams, data analytics teams. I ran marketing. I helped with product. There was 1,000 things that I got to do at that company, which really were booster rockets on my career. And just it's wonderful to be able to actually experiment with different parts of a startup business while it's growing to see what really sparks joy for you.
Amazing. It's interesting that you said you enjoy, this multifaceted role as a generalist, doing everything, from scratch. Was there a quality, or was there an incident that got you to kind of be that hands-on kind of person? Were you always that kind of person?
That's a good question. I think it was much more, I've always thought of myself as a generalist or someone who enjoys sort of interdisciplinary work. I studied economics and history in college, and it's always been cool to marry different parts of your brain. Interestingly, given my current role at Carta now, I had never really done any data visualization or anything like that before I got out of school. And then the product at this startup Public Relay, it was many things, but the core of it were analytics pages around media, natural language processing, and media intelligence. And those, having charts be effectively the product or a large part of the product made you think all day about charts. And because we were working with public relations professionals or communications professionals at big firms, those people are really smart, but they're not super data informed, right? Like data, they think in words, they don't think in numbers. So being able to create charts and graphs that are compelling even to a non-technical or non-data audience, I think was something that I didn't originally intend to get into. But as soon as I found it, it was this sort of endless fascination to me to like, how can I make stories more compelling through these charts and graphs so that everyone can see at a glance like what is going on. And I think that's obviously shown through to the work I do today at Carta.
Mm. Did you know back then that this data, the theme of data and representation, this digestion of data was the thing that will get you to wake up every morning like today? Did you know that back then it was that thing that would
I had,
you up?
had no idea, man. No idea. It was just like this cool hobby that I got to play around in and I loved. And then, a lot of people say you should just find what you're most passionate about at work and do that. And I think that's a little too easy to say, but not actually to do, because you have to find something that intersects with what is useful. If you just love something that is not material to the business, it doesn't really matter if you become the world-class expert in that. So you have to find the corner of I'm fascinated or curious about this thing, and this is very useful to my company. And luckily, one of the weird overlaps that happened for me was it's March or April of 2020, middle of or start of the pandemic. Everyone's at home here in the States, very scared. And I had been building charts and graphs for the last 6 years at the startup. And so I go looking for startup or information on the COVID pandemic and just start charting it. And I'd never been on Twitter before. I got on Twitter just to like share a bunch of charts. And through one thing led to another. And then I got introduced to the journalists at the Atlantic magazine. And they had just spun up a program to start tracking COVID at the state level. So hospitalizations, cases, deaths, all these like statistics around COVID that were coming out on state websites. They would aggregate those up and try to create a national database. And I joined that project and they were to run the data viz team there. And that was the aha moment for my current role at Carta, where you could see that data that is difficult to find and not easily understandable. There's a huge role to be an explainer to the world about that sort of information. It started with health data on the COVID side for me, but very rapidly I looked over a bunch of different businesses and said, I think in B2B, this is going to become a major marketing motion because you can actually be involved in conversations that your prospects care about without having to pitch your product, right? I don't spend a lot of time trying to sell people on Carta. I spend time trying to help them with their current fundraising challenges. And then they end up liking Carta because we can be so helpful. So that was an interesting path, and obviously terrible that it had to come out of the pandemic, but it was this eye-opening experience.
Mm. We all have, these defining moments. I think this question leads to what was the biggest challenge you faced early on in your career, and how did it shape the trajectory of your journey in the startup ecosystem now?
Biggest challenge I faced, well, I can remember very clearly about a year and a half, 2 years after joining the first startup out of school, we were building a new product. And it was my first time ever getting to see a product get built from the bottom up. So, from the initial product ideation sessions to working with the engineers to trying to figure out how to sell it, like involved in all parts of that process. And it was a complete and total flop. Like nobody bought it. I think we tried to sell it for a year and 2 people purchased it. And one of them, I think, was on a trial basis. So really one company did. And we had spent so much time and effort and thought into this thing, and it resulted in nothing. And it taught me 2 things. So first off is that there's just no guarantees. You can be as thoughtful as you want and you still might completely flop. And the second is that when we look back on why we didn't have the success that we were hoping for, it was entirely down to us building something that we thought needed to exist rather than something that immediately solved the problem. It was such a clear example of a thing that looked good to us because we were in this space every day, but the people who we thought would purchase it never thought about the problem the way that we did. And it was that disconnect was so stark. And maybe, if I had been here in Silicon Valley instead of in DC, we would have had different advisors or different mentors or whatever. But actually, I think that lesson was very helpful to me because I can incorporate it into my work today of always trying to stay very, very close to the actual customer and not get too egghead or sophisticated about a thing that you think should exist just because it would be cool if it did.
Mm, mm. I think one of the most important things when you're on this, kind of career or startup journey is to surround yourself with the right set of minds,
Mm,
advisors, or these voices. Do you
yep.
remember, a typical, a very specific, incident where you had this, person? Do you surround yourself with, do you still surround yourself with these advisors or these thought mentors? Were there people back then that helped you kind of guide through the process?
Yeah, there were a couple folks at the first startup that were great. My old CEO, Eric, was awesome. Definitely was, what you want at the very earliest stage. I think there's two kinds of people that you want in your corner. So the first one is maybe someone that doesn't work at your company, but just takes an interest in you as a thoughtful or interesting person and tries to help you along. That person is great because you can have them provide external perspective and there's no like emotion within the company on like, hey, we just have different ideas about a specific problem, et cetera. They can give you a bird's eye view of things. But I honestly think that what a lot of young people entering startups should try to find more directly is a mentor at their company.
Mm,
And it's finding a mentor is hard. It's not just like you get matched over coffee one time and then, okay, that's what it is. It kind of grows out of mutual respect.
mm,
And hopefully you're working with them. Maybe you don't work with them super often or very closely, but whenever you do, it's like a engaging intellectual experience.
mm,
You want to make sure that you try to be open with those people and say, I love learning from you. Can you give me feedback on what I'm doing?
mm,
And there was one person, Darren, our old SVP of sales at the first startup, who gave me a ton of feedback, was incredibly helpful to me
mm,
moving forward. And then, of course, you try to add to that mentorship. You can think of it like kind of like an advisory board for startups. You want to add to that personal mentor board for yourself as you go through various stops. So now I have probably two or three people that I turn to for career advice or thoughts about broader ideas around, hey, if I wanted to start a side gig or build a business of my own, how would it work? There's a lot of different use cases for them that are incredibly helpful to an early stage career. So as much as possible, like finding a mentor is a huge leg up.
mm, mm, mm. In one of your recent LinkedIn posts celebrating 100K followers, by the way, congratulations. Um,
Thanks, man.
you mentioned that your goal has always been to eliminate some of those dark corners with real evidence, right? To help founders and VCs make better data-driven decisions. What do you
Mhm.
think makes your insights resonate so deeply with such large audience? And how do you decide which dark corners to shed light on next?
I think the reason why some of these insights have seemed to really catch hold, probably for two or three reasons. But one of the biggest ones is that startups, for as much as they are spoken about, and there is this whole industry of talking and considering and developing startups now, it's no longer a couple of founders in a garage wondering what the heck is going on. There's so many accelerators and so many playbooks, and there's just tons of information out there. Is that even given all of that noisy information, there's not a lot of facts.
Mm,
There's just opinions. And so one of the advantages of being at Carta is we have enough of a database, given our market share here in the States with startups, that we can actually just provide some evidence around the discussion. So founders don't have to rely on the last couple founders they spoke to, or maybe their lawyer or even their VC to tell them what the market is. They can have some touch point with reality. That's very, very helpful. That's one. The second is because I think a lot of what's been helpful for me is that I get to speak from my personal brand so that I can answer comments the way that you want. I can have conversations like these. I can just be a real human being and say, look, I'm here to provide some help to founders and VCs. Like, what do you want to know? How can we dig into what's going on in the world? And if I don't know something, I say I don't know, and I'm going to go look it up for you if I can. Like, just being a real human being. I think that sometimes LinkedIn is this place where there's a lot of people who are kind of just giving you a personal story that, may or may not intersect with your experience. But I think a lot of companies can build some cool brands saying, this is what's happening in the world, and then layering in commentary on top of that, those evidence-based facts. It's a great combination. And of course, I'm super lucky in that my team is amazing here at Carta, and our data set is incredible that I get to play around with. So that's a huge part of it, of course.
I want to, go to that second point that you made about, having this, engagement aspect on LinkedIn that you can engage and, participate in comments and things like that. What's particularly appealing about that for you? Is it the people aspect? Is it more of, understanding their reactions about the post or about the data that you shared? Is it more of the, the thought processes behind that? Like, what do you think is, the drive?
I think that this is an underrated aspect of building an audience in general, is that a lot of people think about building an audience for the advantages that it will give them in distribution. And that's obviously very important. That's a great thing to do. If you're an early stage startup founder, by the way, and you are not building a personal brand somewhere, it doesn't have to be LinkedIn, but somewhere, you're missing out. Like, you are the storyteller for your company. If you want people to pay attention to you, you should be in and engaging wherever those people happen to be. But the underrated aspect of audience building is that once you build a sufficiently sized audience and you start engaging with them one-to-one, all of the great stuff that I post, so much of it comes from conversations with people who read the last post and are suggesting great ideas or wondering why this differs from their experience, or even critiquing and saying, hey, I think you missed an important point, which was X. Like, that's where you really learn. And so you get into the bloodstream of the conversation within your industry that matters. It happens that startups are very talkative, and on LinkedIn and on Twitter and elsewhere, like, you can always find a startup community talking about something. But there's many, many, many other verticals where that's true, maybe on a more niche fashion. And I go back and forth with people all the time about, oh yeah, well, it's easy for you, you've got this big data set and et cetera. It's like, if you're well known with the 2,000 to 5,000 right people, it can be massively useful for your business and your personal brand. Like, you don't need to be huge to make this very impactful. You just need to be talking to the right people. So figuring out who those people are and what they want from you is the key. And that's not easy. But once you do it, the comments and the one-on-one, like the DMs, like, you're talking about how to track, or if you're growing an audience, what's the best metric to judge it on? A lot of people will judge it on impressions or followers, etc. I judge my work on inbound DMs. So are the things that I'm posting so good that I'm making people DM me on LinkedIn asking me questions about that thing, or saying thank you, or wanting more that I didn't provide? Like, that's the metric that I track pretty closely.
This leads me to my next question. Did it, like, you're always posting, right? You're always posting every day with like these incredibly detailed startup insights and stats. I'm actually like always fascinated how you do that. Can you walk us through your process? How do you decide what's valuable to share, and how do you stay so consistent?
The consistency is the key point. It doesn't need to be every day. I probably am, for a while now, I think I've been every day, but it doesn't, I think 3 to 4 times a week is probably the minimum that you should be doing this if you're going to get into trying to build a content audience. Because consistency is it's the easiest way to stand out. Most people will not be consistent. And you're wondering, oh, is my content good enough? Is the quality high? Am I saying interesting things? None of that matters if you're not consistent. So consistency is the number one thing if you want to build an audience. And there will be a trough of disillusionment when you are putting out consistent content and still no one is reading it. And that kind of sucks. That happened to me for sure for months at the beginning here, where it felt like I was making good stuff, and basically nobody was reading it. And it was really like a little bit, you had to question like, what the heck am I doing with my time? But then you start to build an audience, and it seems worthwhile. Um, in terms of my process for all these graphics, if there's one thing that we've done, I think a little differently than most at Carta, there's been other teams. I'll reference like Gong had a great research team. Zuora has a cool research team. There's lots of other B2B companies that do research. What they don't do is they don't put it out consistently. They put it out once a quarter, once a year. They do an annual report, something like that. Our difference is that, as you mentioned, I am trying to create a new thing every single day. And so the process behind that is a clean, useful data set. I'm choosing from amongst the different questions I could answer. Some of that is input from the audience, like what seems to be the most engaging topic of the day. Some of that is input from Carta priorities. Hey, we're doing a big push for our investor clients. We should do some investor work this week. It's kind of a mix of a lot of different inputs. But the core process is taking that clean data, piping it into a data visualization tool like Tableau or Flourish, and then finishing it off in a design tool. I use Figma. Other people use Canva. And that allows you to, with all the graphics that I put out, there's like headlines and clear call outs and all that kind of stuff. So the chart is in one tool and the actual outline of the graphic is in another. You just combine those and you have a graphic each time. It seems like a lot of work. Once you start doing it, just like anything, the moment you've done it 10 times, you're much, much better. And when you do it 100 times, you're even better than that. So again, it's just like getting through the first couple months where you're going to be bad at it, and that's okay. You just got to keep moving.
Was consistency like a theme in your life? Were you a consistent person? Was there a theme that made you to where you are now? Because it's like evidently this isn't such an easy thing to do, right? Getting clean sets of data. This will take at least hours every day. And there has to be that thing that makes you do this. I wonder if this was a theme that you had early on in your childhood or early in your career. Yeah,
that's a great question. I don't know if I would have thought of myself as the most consistent person before Ness or like outside of this example. Certainly, growing up, I played soccer, pretty high level soccer for a long, long time. So there was consistency in that like athletic training, always showing up, all that stuff I think matters. And that certainly gets into your sort of character after a while. So maybe that was a part of it. The other part of, because as you said, like consistency is hard. I think one of the reasons that consistency is hard is if you're doing something that you find boring. I couldn't imagine doing what I'm doing every day and not, for instance, liking startups. Like I love this space. I find it endlessly fascinating. So digging into data around startups is not a chore. I would probably be, if not doing it by myself, then at least interested in it outside of this work. The third point that I'll make, other than, maybe some of it comes from early, or maybe it's just like this fascination with this current topic, is it's useful to run a little game with yourself as you're building this content, which is I have two goals. One, I want to produce high quality content for sure. And the second goal is I want to get faster at it every time. So if you have a cycle time goal as well, which is to say, hey, it usually takes me an hour to create this graphic. Could I do it in 55 minutes? Could I do it in 50 minutes? Could I do it in 45 minutes? For a while there, I had a block on my calendar every morning from 8 to 8:40 a.m. And it was just create something, build a graphic, write a post, create something in those 40 minutes. And then I try to make that a little bit shorter each time so that by the end of the year, you're building what used to take you an hour in half the time. And that iteration on cycle time gives you more shots on goal. You can experiment with different things. And it also just is a clear indication that your skill set is improving. And that's nice to know, even if the reaction to the content isn't exactly what you wanted it to be.
I love that answer because it makes me kind of imagine what your day will look like, your early days. You would just wake up, I mean, sometimes I do that as well, like where I wake up and I have nothing like in my head. I'm not being
Yep.
strategic. I have nothing, but I'll just
Yep.
sit and I'll just start writing for the
Yep.
sake of it. I mean, you clearly manage a lot of things, right? You're a head of insights, you're a content creator, you are a community engagement expert. What does a typical, I mean, you briefly touched on it, but what does a typical day look like for you, and how do you prioritize these tasks?
Hmm. It used to be a lot easier because when I got into Carta, my role was pretty clear. Same kind of role. I was running the insights team. It was just me at that point. But the goal was create as much useful data from the underlying Carta data set as possible, then package it up in useful ways. What's happened over the last year as the audience has gotten bigger is that more and more of my time is being spent talking about the work instead of doing the work. So
Mm.
going and speaking at conferences or talking on podcasts or going to accelerator cohorts and like telling them what our data shows about, building a super early stage build a business. And that talking aspect has like wrecked my calendar. Um, you know, both in like actually, hey, if I'm physically speaking somewhere, I have to go there and come back and whatever. But even just in terms of the context switching of, okay, I've got a hour long presentation and then I've got 2 30-minute chunks and then the internal meetings at Carta. And I don't know, you asked if I was, how I'm managing that. I'm not sure I'm managing it very well, to be quite honest. So two things have happened in the interim time. One, I now have a team of two folks that work with me on insights, and they are amazingly helpful, Ashley and Hamza, and they're two people that are providing a ton of leverage to me as this thing grows, and they're going to start talking in public a lot as well. And the second is there's just this, just like there is at any reasonably sized company, there's a internal prioritization that has to happen. Um, the advantage that I have is because I'm putting out content all the time, it's pretty easy for me to stay close to the customer and say, hey, I think I should be spending more time here or less time there. The questions tell you where you should be spending your time. So I find as though the prioritization of the actual insights work isn't so hard. It's fitting insights into everything else that we do at Carta that sometimes is the difficult part. But I'm not going to say I'm sit up here and be like a guru for that. I'm not sure I'm the best at it.
I mean, I think still it's phenomenal, I think it's one of the most quality posts that gets posted this frequently on LinkedIn. I really do think that you're making a huge impact with so much
Thanks.
consistency. I would expect your post to be posted maybe once a month, and I would not be, you know. I mean, yeah. So going back, I do think you're making something. I think you are definitely driving a trend. You're making an impact to the ecosystem. And I think people will still love to know if you have these things, productivity
Mm.
routines. Are there
Yeah.
specific morning or evening routines that you swear by for staying productive and grounding? I mean, you're so humble,
Yeah.
but yeah, we'd love to know. Yeah.
Look, I appreciate it, man. I do. I think that the concept of batching work is very helpful.
Mm.
Um, so I think probably near the middle of this year, I found myself, I took a step back from my calendar and I said, it was after a month or so where I felt like I was doing not great work. And I looked at all the last 4 weeks over my GCal and I was like, what is different about now? And it's just the context switching for me, jumping from not just post to idea to meeting, but like between data sets or different businesses at Carta or internal and external. Like there was just so much time, so many times where I was joining a Zoom and I was reminding myself, like, what is this Zoom about? Why am I here? It was too much noise. And so I am now batching work in terms of internal and external, and then whenever possible by data set function. So is it core cap table data? Is it investor data? Is it, liquidity or private equity data, which is all stuff that Carta gets to work on, which is amazing. But having some sort of framework where you are working in the same mindset for an extended period of time, hopefully at least a couple hours, if not 2 or 3 hours, that's really, really helpful.
Mm.
I haven't found, I don't know if you've tried this trick and had it fail as well. Some people say, I'm going to take one day a week and have like a no meetings day.
Hmm.
I always find that there's meetings anyways that day. Like I don't, they just kind of get scheduled and over. I don't have the ability to like stop that scheduling. Maybe it's just because I'm talking to a lot of external folks, etc. So that's not really a workaround for me.
Hmm.
What I have found is that the time of day for some of this matters. So I tend to do whenever possible speaking in the afternoon as well as email and outreach and things and actual creation in the morning.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like like right after I have coffee and get up is usually when my brain is most ready to think about a new thing.
Hmm. It's fascinating that you figured that you figured which time of the day that you're, ideal or, most productive for a specific type of work. I think I
Mm,
definitely resonate with that. For me, it's the morning as well. Like the first
yeah,
coffee, and I'm sitting here just, thinking about which topic to write. I think definitely time of the day definitely is critical.
yeah,
For
yeah,
consistency. Yeah. Mm.
for sure.
Yeah, so I think my next question is how often do you reflect your goals? You're obviously,
Hmm.
reaching for, a goal in your life, right? Your progress. So what's your method for staying on track? Do you use specific frameworks or personal or professional goal setting framework? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's like two kinds of goals to be set there. One is obviously like my work insofar as it's public on LinkedIn, et cetera, is in service of Carta's goals. So very closely tied into like what the company is trying to achieve. And then we have our little sub insights team and like what are we trying to achieve? And the way that we talk about insights at Carta is um, our core goal is to make Carta data ubiquitous. So
Mm.
anytime that anyone in the tech ecosystem, starting here in the States, and then hopefully globally over time as well, is looking for information about what is the market, we want them to reference Carta first. That's the goal. How are we going to do that? There's a lot of different ways. To date, we've doing a lot of pushing. So pushing on platforms, pushing on newsletter, pushing on podcasts, etc. I think 2025 will be a year where we start pulling people. So putting this data up on carta.com and having it be interactive and explorable for anyone who comes across it so that you can build your own stuff or at least filter down charts that we've made. That's definitely on the roadmap. That's going to be super fun.
Mm.
When we talk about personal goals, a lot of that to me is, you know, yeah, we could talk about where do you want to be personally in 3 years or 5 years and that kind of stuff. Maybe I'll still be at Carta. Maybe I'll be running a company or starting something. Startups. I think I'll still be in startups for sure because it's the part that's most fascinating to me. I do think, and tell me if you feel differently. Sometimes, I have a bunch of friends, and some of them are in very high-powered jobs, and a lot of them are just kind of not the most pleased with their work life.
Mm.
Like they're not, they don't hate it. It's not terrible. It's just not exciting, right? They're just like kind of bored or feel like they're going through the motions. And I don't really ever feel that here. And I am more and more cognizant of the fact that that's not that common. So like if you find something that you really can wake up and be curious about every day, I don't have a strong desire to just like do something else because I've been doing this for a while.
Mm.
I kind of like that I still love this thing.
Mm.
So I don't know, maybe it's a midlife crisis kind of
But
vibe,
I,
but
I definitely resonate to every single word that you said. The reason why I say this is because you mentioned that I will still be in startup. And like
yeah,
actually from a different perspective, they might be thinking, well, Carta is like a multi-billion dollar unicorn. You guys are not a
sure,
startup anymore, right? But I
totally.
also feel
Yep.
that like although I'm an investor, although we're this global VC firm, I still feel like I'm in a startup, and I'll still feel like I'll still be in startup. People might
Yeah.
be saying, Peter, you're not in a startup, you're a VC, your
Mm-hmm.
AUM's this big and that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that how you view that. It's interesting how you think that you're still in the startup mode. And this kind of directs me to this framework that I have, which is I think being in the startup is actually a mentality thing
Mm.
than a job description thing. And in that sense, I still think I'll still be pursuing, whether it be me in 500 or outside, I'll still be in the startup mode where I'll be testing things, where I'll be experimenting things, and where I'll be, challenging myself every day. I think people
Yeah.
you mentioned, yeah, these friends and, colleagues that are at Fangs. I think what that means is you're exposed to the environment where you're maybe perhaps less challenged every day because the
Hmm.
role of a Fang is to maintain their business in a sense. So maybe it's maybe I agree definitely that it's a mentality thing that I think I'll still be and I am in startup mentality now.
That's That's totally right, man. And it's actually why I advocate for people to do a tour at a startup, like a real startup, right? Join a seed stage company or anything, like even I would say Series A and before, but the earlier the better. And
Mm,
just like get a sense for how hair on fire it actually is and
mm,
what the pace is like and what the agency feels like and responsibility. And then if it's not for you, great, no problem. But you have then at least that sense memory to fall back on where you're like, oh, I need to work really hard in
mm,
a sprint, or I need to like, it just is like this, it's this immense sense of agency in my mind where it's like, if I don't do this thing, it's not going to get done. And that is so obvious when you're at a 10-person company that it forces you to say two things. One, am I going to do it? Am I going to get a lot of things done? And then two, I need to have an innate sense of what the most important thing is to do.
mm,
And that sense of what is important to actually do, I think is more rare amongst many different workers than you'd think.
mm,
A lot of people would rather have it laid out for them. This is what I should be working on. But knowing internally, this is what I actually have to be doing,
mm,
that's very valuable. And that
mm,
doesn't go away just because you left the startup.
mm. Um, so as the head of insights at Carta, you're in a unique position to observe startup and venture capital trends.
Hmm.
Looking at kind of the future, how do you think the startup and investment landscape will evolve in the next few years? I mean, we have very dynamic years to come. And
Yeah.
if you can comment on what kind of things that founders should prepare for.
I think the biggest shift over the last couple of years has been sort of a reawakening amongst founders to the different pathways through company building. And I don't mean this as a negative when I say this next statement, but VCs are fantastic at talking about themselves and talking about the pathway of VC. We're some of the best brand marketers in the world are VCs because they make it feel as though the only way to build a meaningful company is to take venture capital. And I'm heartened to see that many founders and even many investors are just more open to different pathways through company building than they seem to be in, say 2020 or 2021. I think that's really healthy. And it doesn't necessarily mean that VC is going to go away or even get smaller. I don't actually predict that very much. But what it means is that the people for whom VC isn't really a fit are no longer going to feel as though they have to fit themselves into that box. They can take a little bit of angel money and figure it out. They can bootstrap. They can, build for an immediate merger or acquisition exit instead of trying for the IPO one. There's all different levels. I'm excited to see like more rungs along the ladder of venture capital where people can get off on the side of the road and say, hey, I have a good idea. It's not going to be worth $1 billion, but it's still more than worth my time.
Mm,
And I love that for a lot of founders. I know personally a lot of founders who are just much more thoughtful about why they're building a business and the kind of business that they want to build, as opposed to saying, I have to IPO. I got on this hamster wheel and now I'm really having trouble getting off. So,
mm,
insofar as that happens, I think it's a really good thing.
mm, mm, mm. You're making a huge impact through your role and your content. What kind of legacy do you hope to leave in the startup world?
And legacy is it's a big word, man. I'm not sure I've done that. I've produced some cool content on LinkedIn. Look, I think one of the things that this work has opened my mind to is that um, there isn't just a differential level within startups of access. There's a differential level of knowledge. So if I think about anything that my team has done over the past 3 years, it has always been to turn a first time founder into a second time founder without their first business having to fail to do it. Like there's this democratization of knowledge that can be so helpful for so many people that don't have the right school networks or hadn't worked at Google or didn't know the right angel investors. That shouldn't matter. It should be about the quality of the idea.
Mm.
So if you believe that, as I do very deeply, that startups they're wasteful and they mostly don't work and they can be really challenging, but they're absolutely crucial for maintaining economic dynamism in America and in the world. Like this is new ideas are inherently important. Then I want to make sure that as many people have the access to try new ideas as possible.
Mm.
That's how I view my team. And I view that way with investors as well as we start to build more and more insights for investors too, because without their capital, in many cases, these new ideas won't get off the ground. So it's a symbiotic relationship. As for legacy, I mean, maybe two things. I hope that one, we've helped some founders and investors make better decisions along the way. And then two, speaking as just in my like role instead of in the content, I think that this kind of role should be something that a lot of B2B companies invest in.
Mm.
I think selfishly, it's the kind of marketing that I want to read. It's the kind of thing where I don't want to read anymore, or I don't want to be pitched products that are just trying to slam sales down my throat. I want to be fascinated by some piece of evidence that you put out, and then I want to learn more about your company.
Mm.
It's just a great way I feel like it's a very customer aligned marketing motion to say, we're just going to tell you about the world and make you really interested in it. And then as soon as you need us, we'll be here. But it's more fun that way. I hope to see it more and more in the LinkedIn feeds and in YouTube and all those places of like, show me what your data says,
Mm. I think it's actually very inspiring to hear how you view your content as sort of not the lagging indicator. Because what I mean by that is, often when we see these stats or data sets or visualizations, people kind of see it as a lagging indicator. This is what happened. But I think, as you said, as you answered, what I understood is that you hope to make this an inspiration and motivation for startup founders to start new companies, or these workers to start new companies, right? Oh, these are the sectors, these are the investment strategies that worked. So you should do that. I think that's an incredible angle to view what you do. This is a leading indicator, and I think that's what kind of, and as I hear from you, I think that's what I read, that you want to. You're not just depicting a picture of what's happening, but you're trying to create energy with this.
That's you said it better than I could. I love that. I love that approach. I'm going to steal it because that's definitely true.
Yeah. So I think we want to round off with a rapid fire round, where I will be asking you a bunch of quick questions. I'm
Let's do
hoping to
it.
make this into a tradition at my podcast. So, are you ready?
Nice. I'm ready.
All right. So, number one, your favorite startup story or founder you've worked with?
I'll shout out a company that I have been close with for a while. As a good friend. His name is Parker Spielman. He's the founder of Deja Blue, which is a battery technology energy company. But Parker's story is awesome because he and a couple of his friends were engineers at Lyft figuring out the matching algorithm for the riding app. So like, how do you make the best possible matching between rider and driver while also maintaining that time and ecosystem health so that you are maximizing utility for everybody? Really cool, interesting network problem. And now he's doing the exact same thing, but with atoms or bits and electrons in electricity, just like a two-sided marketplace. And it's really cool to see it's something that could be like, hey, I learned about this space moving humans around, but it applies just as well to energy, and it probably applies to 100 other sectors. Like, I love watching people take one learning and like flip it into something completely different.
That's amazing. Second question, the most impactful book you've read for your career?
For my career, I could point to a lot of business books, but I'm actually going to go with Asimov's Foundation series. Um, I love that just as like a science fiction. I know it's a book that a lot of sci-fi kids have read and love. But what it drove home for me, because the whole book is about mapping out the next, 10,000 years until the empire or the galaxy can get back to something healthy. And the idea of just like incredibly long-term planning through all of these impossible situations and the collision of human beings over time, it just makes you think a lot. It's like, man, maybe we spend too much time planning. We should just kind of maybe map out a little bit ahead and then like follow the curiosity. At least that's the thing that I took from it.
I love it. I love it. Third question. One thing you wish every founder knew about equity?
Oh man, so many things. The number one thing that every founder should know about equity is that you, the founder, need a vesting schedule as well. It is still shocking to me how many businesses, even on Carta, start out with no vesting for the founders. And I get why that feels kind of lame. It's like, why would I need to vest equity in my own company? This is my company. But I'm telling you now, especially if you have a co-founder, it just saves you from really, really bad outcomes. So put a vesting schedule on your equity. Maybe you and your co-founder will be perfect and you'll make it the distance, but a lot of founding teams split up. When that happens, you'll be very happy that they don't walk away with 40% of the business.
I'm sure founders will appreciate that.
Yeah.
Fourth question, your go-to productivity routine or app?
Used to use Headspace, don't use it as much anymore. I think the number one productivity routine, and this is honestly just a health thing for me, is I used to drink coffee right when I woke up, and now I drink water and wait and then drink coffee. And it makes me feel better in the morning. And side benefit, it makes the coffee more impactful. Like I feel more like the caffeine actually hits me better. So that took a while to get used to, but it's been really helpful if you're addicted to caffeine like I am.
I'll definitely start trying that. The last question, a quote you live by.
Quote I live by. Does make me feel bad because I'm not sure I live by any quotes. I need to think of cooler quotes to live by.
It doesn't have to be.
I mean, obviously, you could go with the basic one. The great Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Like, send the email, send the DM, ask the question. Maybe it'll work.
I love it. I love it. Peter, this conversation has been nothing short of enlightening. Thank you for sharing your journey with transparency, your insights into startups and data and your productivity hacks. I loved it. I know our listeners will take away so many valuable lessons from this call. For anyone who wants to deep dive into Peter's insights, be sure to follow him on LinkedIn, where he offer a masterclass in startup and data and making decisions. And to my audience, I want to thank you for tuning into the very first episode of Insight Marathon, Highly Profitable, Minimally Operable. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could benefit. Yeah, and Peter, I once again thank you so much for this beautiful call.
Absolutely, man. This has been a really fun conversation. Congrats on the new pod.